In 1897, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker sat at his desk and christened his vampire Dracula. The book became the definitive horror novel of the century, and the name became synonymous with the undead, fangs, capes, and castles shrouded in mist. But Stoker didn't invent the name. He borrowed it. 400 years before the novel was published, the name Dracula belonged to a man of flesh and blood, a Prince of Wallachia, a kingdom wedged violently between the Ottoman Empire and the Christian West. His father had been inducted into the Order of the Dragon, earning the title Dracul. The son inherited the patronymic Dracula, son of the dragon, and in the local dialect, son of the devil. The things the real Dracula did make Stoker's fiction look tame. He impaled 20,000 people and left them rotting in the sun. He attacked at midnight and vanished before dawn. And when archaeologists opened his tomb 5 centuries later, they found it empty. The real Dracula didn't need fangs, he had stakes, and the blood he spilled was entirely real. On September 25, 1396, the largest Christian army assembled in a century rode south toward the Danube. They called it the last great crusade of medieval Europe. French knights in gleaming plate armor, Hungarian cavalry, and Burgundian nobles, 100,000 men, according to the chronicles. They believed God was on their side, but on the fields outside the fortress of Nicopolis, their faith would end in a single afternoon. The Ottoman Sultan, Bayezid I, known as the Thunderbolt, understood European pride. He lured the French knights into a reckless charge, breaking their lines and leading them into a slaughter. Thousands were executed where they knelt. Among the few who escaped was Sigismund of Luxembourg, the King of Hungary. His army was annihilated and his reputation destroyed. For 12 years Sigismund rebuilt, and in 1408 he created a secret brotherhood, the Order of the Dragon. Its members swore to defend the faith and destroy the Ottoman threat. They wore the symbol of the Ouroboros, a dragon swallowing its own tail. In 1431 a Wallachian warlord named Vlad arrived at Sigismund's court. The emperor placed the dragon pendant around his neck. From that day forward he was Vlad Dracul, the dragon. In the medieval mind, the dragon was a protector, but in the folklore of the peasantry, the word carried a darker weight. Dracul meant devil. That same year, in the fortified citadel of Saisuara, Vlad Dracul's wife gave birth to a son. They named him Vlad. The boy spent his early years within the safety of the citadel walls, hearing the clock tower mark the hours. But his safety was an illusion. In 1442, his father was summoned by the new Sultan, Murad II. Accused of treachery, Vlad Dracul was given a choice: pay a crushing tribute and surrender his 2 youngest sons as hostages, or die. He chose survival. He rode back to Wallachia alone. His sons, Vlad, aged 11, and Radu, aged 7, were left behind in the fortress of Egregius. They were not prisoners in the traditional sense, they were investments. The Ottomans intended to raise them, indoctrinate them, and eventually install them as puppet rulers. Radu, the younger brother, was beautiful and pliable. He adapted. He converted to Islam, befriended the Sultan's son Mehmed, and became a fixture of the Ottoman court. Vlad did not adapt. He was sullen, defiant, and filled with a cold, growing rage. When they beat him, he stared back. When they demanded submission, he spat. But he was also watching. The Ottomans ruled through terror, and their favorite tool was the stake. Vlad watched public executions. He studied the anatomy of impalement, the angle of entry, the avoidance of vital organs to prolong suffering, the psychological impact of a body displayed for days. The Ottomans meant to teach him obedience. Instead, they handed him a weapon. Something died in the boy during those 6 years of captivity, and something else was born. In 1447, the Hungarian warlord John Hunyadi invaded Wallachia. He hunted down Vlad's father, killing him in the marshes of Baltini. But for Vlad's older brother, Mircea, the death was far worse. The merchant nobility, the boyars, betrayed him. They blinded him with a hot iron poker and buried him alive. When the news reached Vlad in captivity, he made a vow. He would return. He would reclaim his father's throne. And he would make every boyar, every traitor who had a hand in his family's murder, pay in blood. The Ottomans, seeing an opportunity to destabilize the region, gave Vlad an army. In 1448, at 17 years old, he briefly seized the throne. It lasted only 2 months before he was forced to flee. But he had learned a vital lesson. Taking power is easy, holding it requires absolute fear. 8 years of exile followed. He wandered through Moldavia and eventually into the court of his father's killer, John Hunyadi. politics makes for strange bedfellows. Hunyadi needed a ruthless commander who knew the Ottoman mind. Vlad was that man. In 1456, Vlad crossed the Carpathians with a new army. He defeated the usurper and entered the capital of Targovishte as Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia. He was 25 years old. The boyars who had buried his brother alive smiled and bowed, expecting business as usual. On Easter Sunday, Vlad invited the nobility to a feast. The great hall was filled with the most powerful families in the principality. They ate his food and drank his wine. As the festivities peaked, Vlad asked them a question. How many princes have you survived? Some boasted of surviving 7 reigns, others 10. They had grown rich by betraying prince after prince. Vlad nodded. The doors were barred. The older boyars, the ones who had betrayed his father, were dragged outside and impaled while the feast tables were still being cleared. The younger ones, roughly 200 of them, were put in chains. Still wearing their fine Easter clothes, they were marched 50 miles into the mountains to the ruins of Poenari. There, they were forced to build Vlad a fortress. They worked until their clothes rotted off their backs. They worked until they died of exhaustion. The message was clear. The old order was dead. Vlad was the law. To the German Saxon merchants who tried to strangle Wallachia's economy, Vlad was even more ruthless. When they sheltered his enemies, he raided their villages, he burned their crops, and he impaled their people. It was the Saxons who first used the printing press to turn Vlad into a monster. They published pamphlets detailing his atrocities, woodcuts showing him dining among a forest of stakes, dipping his bread in blood. These were the world's first horror stories, and while they were propaganda, they were rooted in truth. Vlad impaled for theft. He impaled for lying. He impaled for laziness. He created a society of absolute order through absolute terror. But his greatest test was yet to come. In 1461, Vlad stopped paying tribute to the Sultan. When Ottoman envoys arrived to demand the gold and the boys for the Janissary Corps, they refused to remove their turbans in his presence. Vlad told them he would help them keep their custom forever. He ordered the turbans nailed to their skulls. War was inevitable. Mehmed II, the man who had conquered Constantinople, the man who had been a child alongside Vlad in captivity, gathered an army of 90,000 men. He intended to crush this rebellious vassal once and for all. Vlad had only 30,000 soldiers. He could not win a conventional war. So, he fought a war of nightmares. He burned his own villages. He poisoned the wells. He destroyed the crops. As the massive Ottoman army marched north, they found only scorched earth and silence. Hunger and disease began to rot the army from within. And then Vlad attacked. On the night of June 17, 1462, Vlad led 7,000 cavalry into the heart of the Ottoman camp. It was a suicide mission with a single goal: kill the Sultan. They struck at midnight. They carved a path of fire and blood through the confused Ottoman lines. Men killed their own comrades in the panic. Vlad reached the Sultan's tent, but Mehmed had been moved or the intelligence was wrong. They killed the generals inside and vanished into the dark before the sun rose. It was a psychological masterstroke. The Ottomans were terrified. They were fighting a ghost. But the true horror awaited them on the road to Targovishte. As the Ottoman army approached the capital, the vanguard stopped. The entire column ground to a halt. Mehmed rode forward to see what had frozen his soldiers in fear. Stretched out before them, covering 7 acres, was a forest of the dead. 20,000 bodies. Ottoman prisoners, Bulgarian allies, traitors. They hung on stakes, arranged in geometric patterns. The smell of decay was a physical wall. Even the Sultan, a man who had ended the Byzantine Empire, was shaken. The chroniclers say he gazed upon the carnage and declared, "I cannot take the land of a man who does such great things." The army turned back. The stakes had stopped an empire. But where armies failed, politics succeeded. Mehmed left behind a weapon more dangerous than cannon fire: Vlad's brother, Radu. Radu the handsome. Radu the favorite. He didn't bring terror, he brought promises of peace. He turned the boyars against Vlad. He turned the army against Vlad. Slowly, the impaler was abandoned. Vlad fled to Hungary, seeking aid from his ally, King Matthias Corvinus. Instead of an army, Matthias gave him a prison cell. For 12 years, Vlad languished in captivity, a political pawn. He would return to the throne one last time, in 1476. But he was an old man now. The world had moved on, and his enemies were waiting. 2 months into his third reign, he was killed in a muddy skirmish near Bucharest. His head was cut off, preserved in honey, and sent to Constantinople. It was displayed on a stake, a final, grim irony. But what of his body? Monks at the Snagov monastery claimed to have buried him in front of the altar. For centuries, it was venerated as the resting place of the dragon. But in 1933, Uk opened the tomb. It was empty. No bones, no dust, nothing. There are two Vlads in history. To Romanians, he is a hero, a harsh ruler who did what was necessary to save his country from annihilation. To the West, he is the monster of the German pamphlets, the sadist who drank blood. Bram Stoker didn't create the monster, he simply gave it a new name. The behaviors that made Vlad legendary map onto the vampire myth with uncanny precision. The attack at midnight, the vanishing at dawn, the bodies that refused to lie down, the empty grave. Vlad the Impaler died 500 years ago, but Dracula lives forever.